The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Education and asks, how important is it that parents receive plain English information on their children's progress against national standards?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr. Speaker, it is very important that the information that parents receive explains to them clearly and in plain language how their child is doing at school. This means information that tells them what progress their child is making and what they are achieving in relation to the national standards.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Speaker, how would the Minister explain in plain English to the parents of a Year 8 student that notwithstanding their child being in Stay 6, being in the top half of the ASTL results, fulfilling the expected requirements of the New Zealand curriculum, being in the average and above group for PAT, and being ranked in the top third of the OECD, their child has failed to meet the numeracy requirements of her standards?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr. Speaker, what that member fails to understand is that the national standards are designed to lift standards, and they are aligned to NCA Level 2. So the child in those circumstances would not be on track to achieving NCA Level 2.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, it was I think, a question about measurement, not lifting, and how she would explain that a child that is average or above in New Zealand had actually failed. It was not how the tool is to be used in the future.
Well, with respect to the member, I listened quite carefully to the Minister's answer, and unless I misheard her, I believe she was pointing out in her answer that the standards being set may actually be a little higher, that some who might have met the average, been above the average in ASTL tests, may not meet the standards, which are maybe differently set. But the member can pursue that in supplementaries. Alan Peachy.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister of Education. What support is being provided to schools to help them report to parents in plain language on children's achievements and progress against national standards?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr. Speaker, more than $26 million of existing professional development funding has been budgeted and focused to deliver extensive, specialised support around national standards, including reporting to parents. We have also provided a range of online resources and a self-review tool to support schools' improvement of their reporting practices.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Question. How will having a standard which her ministry says that 50% of Year 8 students will not meet help identify the bottom 20% of students she says makes up the tail of underachievement she wants to focus on?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr. Speaker, the national standards are designed for all students, not just the bottom 20%. So, first of all, no good teacher would ever label a child who failed the national standard a failure, who didn't reach the national standard a failure. No good teacher would ever call a student a failure. But secondly, schools would be reporting to parents about the progress and achievement their child is making in relation to the national standards.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
And I think you know what it is, Mr. Speaker. Again, it was a pretty simple question about how, when you have a standard which is set at 50%, it helps identify the bottom 20%. And I don't think that was addressed.
On this occasion, I actually do support the Honourable Member. The Minister, the question was reasonably concise and asked how schools would identify the bottom 20% that he understood were causing concern, and the Minister didn't give any information on that at all. It would be helpful if she could. The Honourable Anne Tolley.
Mr. Speaker, to the member, the national standards are designed for all students, not just the bottom 20%. However, all students, teachers are required to report on all students to their parents in writing, in plain language, twice a year. So even the bottom 20% will be reported to their parents how they are progressing and achieving against the standards.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
How then do her standards differentiate between a child that is in the bottom 10% and a child who is, say, at 45% of their cohort?
The Honourable Anne Tolley.
The discussions between teachers and parents are entirely at their discretion. So how a teacher explains to a parent where their child is at that particular point in time, how they have progressed, is up to them. They know best their relationship with their own parents. But what they must do, and what parents want, we know that because they've told us, is to know how their child is progressing against the national standards.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Speaker, it is the same point of order as I had before, sir. I did ask how the national standards help differentiate between a child that it's at 10% and at 45%. The discussion with the parent doesn't actually help identify where a child sits against that standard.
Order. Again, I have to confess, though, I mean, the Minister did in her answer focus on how teachers would report to parents rather than how the standards would differentiate between the bottom 10% of students and say a student at around about the 45% level. It would be helpful if the Minister could indicate in answer to the member's question how the standards will differentiate between those students. The Honourable Anton.
Mr. Speaker, if the member cares to read the national standards, he will see that it is set out very well what is expected at standard. There are exemplars for teachers to use and, of course, their own professional judgments on where the child's achievement and progress is sitting. They can also use a whole range of assessment techniques and tools to ascertain that. So the teacher would know, a good quality teacher will know what the difference is in a child's achievement and progress.
The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
What then is the point of having a standard?
The Honourable Antolli. The Honourable Antolli.
Mr. Speaker, back to basics. The national standards are designed to ensure that every single New Zealand child in reading, writing and maths is able to achieve and progress so that they will achieve NCEA Level 2 as a minimum qualification that the modern child needs in order to live a full and successful life. I do understand that that is a difficult concept for the opposition to grasp.
Order. The Honourable Trevor Mallard.
How is identifying half the Year 8 children as not meeting a standard going to help every child achieve NCEA Level 2?
The Honourable Antolli.
That, Mr. Speaker, is exactly the point. That is the legacy of the last 9 years of a Labour government, that half the children in that Year 8 are not on track in mathematics to achieve NCEA Level 2.
Point of order, the Honourable Trevor Mallard.
Mr. Speaker, the question was how identifying children would help them get to Level 2 NCEA. That was the purport of my question, and Mr. Speaker understands that. It was not how they got there, it was what is the point of having these standards if they do not assist children getting there.
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
I go pleading to you on the basis of the member's own interpretation of his own question. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Hansard will show what he asked. It will equally show that was a very good response. The fact that he claims that 50% of Year 8 students won't meet a standard simply means that those students have got an awful lot of work to do. And the Minister pointed out that's the legacy of the last government's failings.
Order. I've got to say nice try, but what's difficult is the member's asked a pretty fair question, how identifying a certain number of children as not meeting a standard will assist them in reaching NCEA Level 2. It's a fair question and perfectly capable of answer. And to say, well, it's all the fault of the last government that 45% aren't meeting this new standard is not really answering that question. And I think the question deserves an answer before a political criticism is made, because it's a fair question. How will identifying that, because I can think of all sorts of ways of answering it, but I think an answer is deserved. The Honourable Antolli. point of order, the Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, if this is a Year 8 standard, then it is patently evident that most of the years that